Okay, call a meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. This is a public council meeting. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item this evening is minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, June 20th. Recommendation to approve.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Marsden. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is minutes of the Mayarville Commercial and Cultural Revitalization Advisory Committee meeting held on Thursday, April 28th. Recommendation to receive.
No. Moved by Councillor Reid, second by a very jovial Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried happily and unanimously. Mr. Clerk.
Item 3 is minutes of the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting of Tuesday, June 7th. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Zerillo. Councillor Zerillo.
Thank you. It is mentioned in the minutes, but I just thought I would mention it out loud on page 2 about having the suggestion of including the word accessibility in the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan Implementation Strategy. I'm just pointing that out just on advocacy for those that have limited accessibility and their desire to be involved in sports and rec in the community. That's it. Just calling it out. Thank you.
Okay. Motion is the minutes. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is the item from this evening's public hearing. It pertains to zoning amendment bylaw number 4675, and it's to facilitate a proposed subdivision at 937 Edgar Avenue. Staff recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Safe Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4675.
Moved by Councillor Zerillo, second by Councillor Asmussen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item number 5 pertains to the fees and charges amendment parking rates bylaw number 4691. Staff recommendations that council give fourth and final reading to fees and charges amendment parking rates bylaw number 4691.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Marsden. Councillor Zerillo.
I just had a quick question for staff about, do we at this point in time have any 15-minute free parking spots in town center, maybe around High or Glen? I just wanted to get an understanding of if there is any free parking for short periods of time that still exists in downtown Coquitlam.
Mr. Diozegi.
Through your worship, no, I'm not aware of any 15-minute parking zones for free at this point in the town center.
Well, there are parking spaces that are for free.
Right, but those are like for 2 hours, typically.
Yeah.
Okay, the reason that I bring it up then is I wasn't sure if there was, but I do know that I've received a couple of stories from residents recently that have just quickly stepped in and out and they've gone to get change or whatever their thing has been. And I'm just wondering if there is an opportunity, maybe not as part of this bylaw, but to have 15-minute free parking, perhaps 1 or 2 on the High or Glen, and how I would bring that forward to this council.
What I may suggest is that staff has been working on an upcoming council report specifically dealing with new parking regulations in conjunction with the opening of the Evergreen line. Okay. And those parking regulations will cover both passenger cars as well as trucks.
Okay.
And that would be a good opportunity to bring this issue up.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We actually had discussions at one point about the possibility of simply making the first 15 minutes free at any of the metered spaces. That didn't happen, but it is one of the things that some communities do is that you go put in your license plate, and if you only need 15 minutes, your license plate is registered for the 15 minutes. It's among the options that are available. This one, of course, just for the folks at home, this particular bylaw only relates to one parking lot, and it's on Lincoln. Okay. Any further discussion? Fees and charges amendment bylaw. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Oh, Councillor Hodge, do you want to interrupt the meeting at this point?
Yes, I'm going to excuse myself from the next item out of an abundance of caution, as I have a shared interest in a property that will be coming forward to zoning shortly.
The next item deals with affects properties that are coming forward in rezoning. So Councillor Hodge absents himself. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 6 pertains to Community Amenity Contribution CAC program expansion. Staff recommendations that Council adopt a city policy and expanded community amenity contribution program that applies citywide for all residential rezoning applications with a program start date of July 1st, 2016. 2, the Council set the community amenity contribution rate with a credit for existing residential floor space at $32.29 per square meter, or $3 per square foot, for the gross floor area of all new multifamily floor space. B, $5,500 per parcel for all new one-family residential lots equal to or greater than 375 meters squared. Or C, $4,800 per parcel for one-family residential lots less than 375 meters squared. 3, direct that all in-stream residential rezoning applications be exempted from contributing to the CAC should they complete their application within 1 year from the program start date. 4, direct that the CAC revenue collected be used primarily to help fund the capital cost of projects identified in the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan implementation strategy.
Okay, and I'll just make one, if we could back up one slide, please. You said or at the end of B. It isn't or, it's and, but that's just to allow council enough time to figure out who's going to move this motion.
Neither word was there.
Neither word was, it's true. It's true. Neither word was there, but if one was implied, it was and. I heard a motion from Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Towner. All in, Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. If I remember correctly, when we originally had this come to council, it seemed to me there was a longer grandfathered period, or a longer period where you wouldn't be charged. And so my recollection was a 1-year grace period for people to go through this. So I didn't realize that meant 1 year to complete the project. I thought it was, say, from now until a year from now.
There's one clarification I think staff are going to provide right now that's going to help your next part of your question.
Okay.
That's okay?
Yeah.
Mr. McIntyre, is it 1 year to complete the project or 1 year to complete the rezoning?
Your Worship, it's the rezoning, because it's through the CAC program, it's the rezoning process that's the mechanism or the way that the CAC contribution is received. So it's following and sort of modeled on the city's development cost charge program, where we have as a effective date and there's a 1 year grace period for in-stream applications. That's complete applications that are in process to get through. In this case here, it's for the rezoning part. So it's a little more generous because the rezoning tends to be at the front end. What may be different now with this report is that I think with earlier reports, and Andrew can correct me or clarify on this, we may have been identifying an effective date that might have been a little further out. Right now, because here we are, Monday, June 27th, and we're recommending July 1st. So it's a little shorter lapse time than maybe what we had indicated before, but the same concept of the 1 year grace period is consistent.
Okay.
Sorry,
that might not have been the right answer, but I wanted to.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and I didn't mean complete the project. I meant complete the rezoning. I know I said to complete the project. And so yeah, so if I'm a landowner now and I haven't necessarily been paying attention, and so there's no way I can get in the process in the next week. So I just thought we were going to have a longer period before that 1 year period kicked in. Was I mistaken?
Again, through the chair, there may have been a greater lapse between when the reports came forward and there was discussion about it and when the proposed startup date would have been. What's happened with this project, though, it's been back and forth a bit, but there has been quite considerable consultation information out to the usual Urban Development Institute, Greater Vancouver Home Builders. But as well, we went out to applicants that had gone through the process in Coquitlam. So like several hundred parties were notified, along with community associations, general public, and that. So there was, every effort was made to get news out or information out about this proposed program. Again, maybe the time between this report coming to council when the recommended effective date is shorter than what it was envisioned before.
Okay, thank you.
I had, anticipating the question, I had a couple of discussions with staff this morning, and among the options available to us are to change the July 1st to a different date, and staff are comfortable with something like September 1st, which would provide 2 months of get your applications in, followed by a 1 year grace period for applications that are in as of September 1st, as an example. And I'm just throwing that out. I've got several other speakers. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. This afternoon, we heard a member of the public present to committee, and she unusually provided a soundtrack, a little rock and roll song in the background of her presentation. And I think there could be a soundtrack behind this one. It could be Dire Straits, perhaps Money for Nothing, because we think we're going to get the money out of the developers, and there are not going to be any consequences on affordability, on housing supply, or anything like that. The other one might be from Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall, because I think this does provide another brick in the wall, separating people who want to buy homes from their ability to do so. It affects affordability. Now, there's been some very good responses to my queries by and other people on council and the public about its impact, and our report to council has certainly shown those. What some of the studies have found, that it's not going to have any impact on, or very inconsequential impact on affordability. But the money does have to come from somewhere for this, and whether it comes from the homeowner who's been passed on the charges by the developer, or the developer, or the landowner to begin with, it's going to have a consequence. If let's say it's the landowner who is suddenly offered because of this new program, X $100,000 less than he or she thought she was going to be getting for the property, that landowner might be a little less likely, or in a little less of a hurry to sell that land, thinking I should hold out a little more. And what happens when land is held out of the market? Well, the housing doesn't get built when it should have been built. That's a negative impact on affordability when that happens, because it decreases the supply, increases the scarcity. So at that end, it could be like that. Now, that's a point that I've raised in the past, and I want to elaborate on. And I'm continuing to have concerns, and a certain amount of still, after all these months, I really don't have a clear picture in my mind about what is going to happen if, as the General Manager of Planning Development just said, this is a process that takes place through the zoning process, rezoning process, that a developer says, well, I'm not giving you that money. This is supposed to be voluntary, of course. It's not mandatory. We've got no legal right to do this. It's just we're asking for it. It's voluntary. We make them sign a letter that says this is voluntary. So that's a specific question I have. So and I've asked it before, and the answer just never seems to take. It doesn't make sense to me. If this is voluntary, and a developer says, I'm not going to pay this, come on, give me a break, So what does planning do then? Does planning recommend against the rezoning? Or can that decision by the developer have any impact on the planning department's recommendation? That's a question to the general manager, through the chair.
Mr. McIntyre.
Your Worship, I know this issue has come up several times in the past, and it's true. It is a voluntary contribution. But it's also subject to the rezoning process, which there is some latitude around that. And I'll come back to that in a moment. As to the exact question, we would be bringing forward an application, even if it wasn't with our support, in any event, if an applicant asked that it go before council, because at the end of the day, we staff are not to act as gatekeepers. We bring forward applications to council for ultimate decision. We obviously want to, as much as we can, take a position and provide a recommendation so we can provide some assistance to council in considering that matter. I'm not sure at this point if someone flatly refused to make the CAC contribution, would that be enough to tip our view to not support the application? We would certainly bring that to council's attention, but I think we'd want to look at that in light of other factors surrounding the application.
Yeah, that's actually a shocking answer. You're not sure whether or not that's going to have any impact. So if I don't get my money, I'm not going to say one way or the other what I'm going to do. Well, let's just see it, play it by ear. I mean, do you want to be a business doing business in this city with that sort of an attitude? I do not think so. We should, this plan has been sold on what provides clarity for the developers. The developers will know going in now what's expected of them. And now you're saying, well, we don't really know. We don't even know if we're going to approve the rezoning or not. That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. I'm speechless, so I'm going to stop talking right now. I do not agree with this one bit.
Very good. Okay, Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. There has been a lot of talk about this and the voluntary component of it, and I think I'm coming down on the side of supporting this this program, because I think what it helps us do is deliver the services that the residents coming into the area want, or the residents that are already here. It's ensuring we deliver the amenities they need. Now, would it be nice if the province brought in legislation and said the CACs were like DCCs or rolled them all into one? That might be nice, but they haven't done that. So what it's now looking at is saying we have increased pressures to deliver services for our residents. We've got increased pressures on growth and the stresses that puts in neighborhoods, and we need the tools necessary beyond property taxes to pay for those things. So yes, this gives some certainty. There are certain municipalities have taken different methodologies with their CACs, and this one, it lays it out very clearly. So individuals in the industry that I've talked to have said, at least it's got that going for it. At least it's got that certainty. In terms of affordability, there's been a lot of talk about the impacts of municipal fees on affordability. And a number that's been thrown around in the city of Vancouver's example, they estimate it's $100,000. So I've asked, what's the impact here? I believe on a single family detached subdivision, we would be looking at, if this were to pass, approximately $35,000 in total costs. Development charges, permits. What are the city costs associated with these numbers? 35% of what we're hearing and seeing criticized in Vancouver. So would it be nice that we didn't have to have this there? Yes, it would. But we've got limited tools available to us from a revenue stream to deliver the services that our residents want and our new residents demand. And I think this is a tool that we've got in our toolbox now, if we pass this, that we can move forward and say, let's go and bring forth projects such as the one we have a CAC for right now. It will fund the YMCA project. Should it come to pass in Coquitlam, CACs are paying for it. That is a major initiative that our municipality has been screaming for. The residents in Coquitlam have been screaming for. So I think this gives that tool, makes it available for them. It's there now. This just takes it across the municipality and says, other areas need services too, they need amenities, and this gives us the tools for that, whether it be recreation facilities, whether it be parks, whether it be upgrades, whether it be down the road for transit contributions. Don't know what that might look like, but this gives that tool, puts it in our toolbox and enables staff to move forward. So I'm going to support this. I think it's the right way to go. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Asmunsen, myself, and Councillor Reid. Councillor Asmunsen.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read from a briefing we got from the Municipal and Planning Law. And what I'm going to read out, and just that it states in here that the province cautions local governments that CACs have no legal basis, and cities, CACs, as a possible cause, have no legal basis. So CACs have no legal basis because there is no legislation authorizing the use of them. Municipalities cannot zone land exchange for amenities. And well, just want to go right through. And the thing is that local governments do not have the express legislative authority to negotiate CACs. In fact, the courts of British Columbia have suggested on a number of occasions that this practice is problematic. Now, going under some of the do's and don'ts, local governments should ensure a direct, demonstrable link between CACs and the impacts of new development. And the CA should remain proportional to such impacts. Under the things that should not do, present developers with a list of required contributions that would be expected in the rezoning to proceed, imply that CACs are not negotiable, guarantee that zoning amendments will pass of CACs, calculate CACs on the basis of property value. Continuing on, I'm going to go back to Mr. O'Neill's question, back to Mr. McIntyre. If a developer meets the city requirements for development, but says he will not pay CACs, what happens with the application?
Mr. McIntyre.
A rezoning application, if it's at a point that it's ready to come forward to council, it will come forward with a staff report. And it's looked at in its totality. It may be a change in use proposed, maybe higher density, there's greater value. So at that time, there would be an assessment made and a recommendation provided. And ultimately, it rests with council to make that decision whether to support the rezoning or not.
I'm not talking about, all I'm talking about is we have in our neighborhood plans, the zoning for that land is identified in our neighborhood plan. A developer is building strictly to what's required in that development under the neighborhood plan. And he comes forward with this application. Would staff recommend or not recommend that application go through to council?
We would probably, if it's consistent with the neighborhood plan, it would be, support of the land use, but we'd have to point out that the applicant has not followed the CAC program. And so that would be another factor for council to weigh.
The other question, through to anyone on staff, other than the Coquitlam CACs, what other voluntary fee payment programs does the city have?
Through the chair, nothing is formal that I'm aware of, but there are, on occasion, there are through development applications, development agreements, there's various contributions that are negotiated and commitments are reached. What this program does is provide a little more formality around that, a little more clarity and openness. And while it's not supported in legislation, it does follow a provincial publication in terms of guidelines for this type of program.
Yes, but guidelines are, so we have no other programs like this. These are guidelines, but there is no legislation that enacts any. Now, when we look at this and we talk about DCCs, development cost charges have legislation attached to them. They have the requirements of what we can collect DCCs for, what we can spend DCCs on, and that the legislation also states under DCCs when we can raise those DCCs, and that has to be approved by the province, also within DCCs. So one has legislation, one doesn't. So if this passes tonight, probably will, would the city planning department still seek to negotiate other amenities from a developer on top of the CACs that are presently being paid if this passes?
Mr. McIntyre.
That'd be pretty ambitious. Again, it would depend on the nature of the project. It's not unusual that through major development applications, in the back and forth of the discussions and ultimate negotiations, there are commitments that are made by the developer. This provides some formality to that. We are hoping that through this process, it provides a workable, consistent framework, so that it takes the uncertainty away, the risk away of what exactly would be sought, what exactly would be proposed.
Okay, when I get further into the balancing community planning, public benefits, and housing affordability, this is the guidelines. And when I look under planning for CACs, you know, they talk a lot about working with the community and stakeholders to include developers to identify amenities that will address the impacts of growth. When it comes to considering CACs for amenities that are not located near the site being developed, particularly important to apply principles of proportionality to demonstrate the link with new development. For example, contributions to recreation across town may be legit, but it should be based on a reasonable estimate of usage by residents' development. And to ensure that the public and the applicant developer can appreciate that CAC is proportional to the impact. And that comes down to another question is that these CACs are going to be collected in certain areas. But as the report points out, these CACs will not be spent only in these areas. They will be spent in areas where there is no growth or very limited growth. Correct, Mr. McIntyre?
Your Worship, the program that's proposed here is expanding the existing CAC program, which is limited right now to the Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood, and that was focused on generating funds for a specific community amenity in that area, community center. This proposed expanded citywide program is recommended to be one of the key financial supports for the Parks, Rec and Culture Department, Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as part of their implementation strategy for that. So these would be facilities and amenities across the city that were identified through that master plan process. So you're trying to have that broader reach, that broader benefit. And similar to the city's DCC program, we collect DCC citywide. They're then spent on projects across the city in accordance to the need and priority. And I imagine it would be the same in this instance here. If this program is supported, expanded CAC program supported by council, it would be utilized citywide to achieve the Park and Recreation Master Plan strategy.
Well, that's not completely correct, Mr. McIntyre. That DCCs are to be used for growth areas or areas affected by growth. As we've seen before in this, years ago, Mayor Stewart, remember that we had some issues with some DCC money being spent on parks in certain areas that didn't meet any of the growth requirements that were spent in areas. So DCCs have a caveat that the money being spent must be in a relationship to the growth in that area, or there's an impact from that development and growth in that area, whether it's a widening of a road or something else. It does not give carte blanche to simply spend the money on DCCs on any park in any part of the city or any road or anything else in the city.
Through the chair, that's true to the extent that, yes, there's certain elements, particularly when you get to parks and park improvements, there's a fairly limited list of what is referred to as DCC eligible. You can do certain things in a park. You can't, for example, put artificial turf in a park. So there are limitations that way under the DCC program. Again, what's proposed here with the CACs is to provide a greater flexibility, but consistent with the park recreation master plan to achieve those amenities and benefits.
Well, I will continue on. I think there's, in the guidelines, it talks about making sure that when you have CACs, that there's a direct benefit between the project and the money that's being collected to show the benefit back to that project. So that's an area that I have concern about on the citywide DCCs. What I'm going to get into now is the fees on this expansion. When I looked in the report that was attached to us here, it talks about a Vancouver report about housing affordability. I'm not going to talk about housing affordability. That's going to get into a whole other information gathering and discussion and balancing. When I'm going to look at the Vancouver report, when I look at it, it went out and talked to stakeholders in the industry and their impact. It was, I don't know if I'd call it an excellent study, say it's okay, but when I read through this thing here, in Vancouver, this report is strictly really, to me, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. McIntyre, talks about high-density development. It doesn't talk about applying CACs on single-family development in the city of Vancouver. Can you correct me if I'm wrong in that assumption, Mr. McIntyre?
Your Worship, I have to confess I didn't read the Vancouver report cover to cover. I read through the key points, and I believe it says, Councillor Asmundson suggests, they focus on multifamily. That's the prime development driver in Vancouver.
So I think that gives a bit of an unbalanced look in the report to convincing council as the need for CACs, particularly when they become affected on single-family homes. So there already is a number of fees, Councillor Mars was talking about, for civic and regional governments that add to the cost. DCCs include parkland acquisition, parkland improvement charge, which that alone is about $13,000 per single-family housing development, approximately. Transportation charge by the city. There's also a Metro Vancouver sewerage and drainage DCC that's paid by a single-family development. City and water drainage charge, connections fees, and school acquisition charge, a 5% charge, is also added to a single-family development when you subdivide, which is only limited to over 3-lot subdivision. Once you go past 3, you then pay a 5% fee. So you're narrowing it down to a certain smaller band of people. And if you're subdividing into 3 lots, on the full appraised value of a 3-lot today, you would be looking at approximately, let's say, $2 million, approximately, in a rough net. So that homeowner or landowner or developer is going to pay another $100,000 for parkland acquisition. Correct, Mr. McIntyre?
I'm not following your numbers exactly, but yeah, so you're enumerating there is all various additional charges and fees.
Well, taking the charges going down, but stopping at the charges that are for basically up until the 5%, there's a bunch of charges that are all part of development. There's already a parkland acquisition, a parkland development charge. Then when we get through that, there's also the 5% charge. Just taking the 5% charge only on a value of 3 lots subdivided in today's market would be approximately, I'm just doing for round numbers, $2 million on 3 lots appraised value, because it's on the total appraised value of the subdivision. And so that would equate to approximately $100,000 collection by the city from that development to parkland acquisition.
It's true that the 5% parkland, either dedication or cash in lieu contribution, and that's as per the legislation, and that kicks in for subdivisions of a certain size, and it's based on those numbers. The CAC program that's being recommended is at rezoning. It's for the rezone land.
That's fine, Mr. McIntyre, but what I'm talking about when we're looking at CACs between multifamily and single family, you're looking at quite an impact already on single family subdivisions and their contribution to fees and to parkland acquisition. The other zones, for the most part, do not pay this fee. No other area except for your regular parkland acquisition and parkland improvement charge is about $13,000. Only these greenfield areas are subdividing into 3 lots or more pay that parkland acquisition charge. Secondly, when you look at the Vancouver report, you look at density in the CACs, going back to CACs, is that you can use density, sometimes a number of units, to help spread your cost out and make the CAC that you're paying more palatable. When you're in a single-family development, you have no ability for really increasing except what's in the zone that you're allowed. So you're more limited in a single-family home on the cost of CACs. That's why I think it's unfair to include single-family housing development within the CAC charges. I think it's quite an excessive burden that single-family homes are already paying. And I think we are going to be continually looking at that issue. So those are my points about this, but my main point about this all will come down to is a voluntary program because we have no legislative authority to collect this money. It would be no different than if we went into the city and we had every department and we said, well, whatever permit you're getting or whatever application's going in there, you apply your application and on the side it says a $200 extra, a $200 voluntary processing fee. And the person says, well, what's that for? Well, you know, it could take a month, 2 months, but you pay this $200, you'll get it back within 24 or 48 hours. You know, there's the same type of underlying issues here, what Councillor O'Neill talked about. It's talked about the integrity of local government in this process. It's been mentioned that we need more revenue to provide the services in a growing community. And, you know, we do need more revenue to provide. New development, when they develop, they pay all the hard costs in, let's say, a single-family development. The roads, the sewers, the water, the street lights, the sidewalks, everything. Then the DCC contribute to the growth of the roads, to parks, and everything in that area. So new development pays it's quite a lot of its share, and you're going to ask a certain part of development to pay more or put an extra burden upon new development to not only put new facilities and have them pay for a larger portion of new facilities where they may be, but you're also asking them to pay for newer facilities outside their areas, which I don't think is very balanced in the approach in this report. And that's why I really can't support this. This isn't fairly balanced in it. I mean, when I look at it, and it was said earlier, there's pressures. We need money. We collect taxes, and taxes are to be spent for the city as a whole as a universal, that we all use facilities, that the cities are all for the benefit of all citizens in Coquitlam. Shouldn't we be paying all together for all the facilities that here in this city together, rather than burdening one specific area? And we have some very specific areas in here. So for me, for the legislation ability of it, what I think is not the way to go. I know we have the CACs in Coquitlam, but the CACs in Coquitlam were directed at a single specific project to benefit that area under high density development from only and not from single family homeowners. If you had passed, and we tried to pass a CAC in Coquitlam that expanded the area to tax all single family homes and everybody else, it probably wouldn't have passed. But we have a specific project there that's a specific benefit for that community here. We're talking about an implementation program by Parks and Recreation that is going to show a 15-year plan, but that can change by council's directions in the future, and there's no direct correlation to the collecting of CACs in this citywide program and spending the money in those areas where it's collected for the benefit of those developments, which is another issue that I see with this program. And the final point is that the rate that we charge single-family homes is double what we would charge that we charge in multifamily units. So we're adding a lot more cost per single-family house as the charge goes, and I think single-family has a tremendous amount of charges already in it, paying a greater proportion of it already. So I know there's others here who will speak about this. I would probably hesitate that there will only be 2 people voting against this. This will pass. But I had to make my thoughts known on clarity, honesty of government, openness of government, and doing things that, as we as a local government, should be doing things that are provided to us by legislation. And I would say that the provincial government is abdicating their responsibility under CACs by not providing legislation for their use and how they are used. And I think by allowing them that leaves this terrible murky area that all the cities get involved in, and all looking for better things for their communities. But it's just not the right way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So there is no legislative framework. There's no legal basis. There's no legal basis for public art either. Quite frankly, most of the bike infrastructure we put in place has no legal basis. We don't have a legal basis for a rental replacement policy. We just require that builders replace rental in some circumstances. Landscape planting schedules, try to find that in the Local Government Act. These are things that we require of development, or we ask of development, and then if they don't want to propose some of these things, we then have the ability to contemplate whether the benefits to the community of the development are outweigh the other aspects of it, and we have to have an open minded. In fact, all the way through this document. This is not the legal basis, but this is the document that the province publishes called Community Amenity Contributions, CACs, Balancing Community Planning, Public Benefits, and Housing Affordability. And it goes through, talks about how you implemented CAC program, talks about all of the various ways that you might do it, what you might apply the money for. I'm going to start near the back of that because it actually has a really neat discussion about, that's on page 15 if anyone's following, are CACs likely to reduce landowner profit? Because it goes through some of the misconceptions that if you charge CACs, then the developer will raise his prices. If the developer could raise his prices, he would raise his prices. The developers don't sell for less than they can get just because we haven't charged them a fee. If they can get $280 a foot, they're going to get $280 a foot because that's called market price. They'll get that. If they could get 300, they wouldn't sell for 280 because we've been generous and not charged them CACs. Market price is what they put at the bottom of their pro forma, and then they work backward, try to figure out how much can they buy the land for? How much can they bid for the parcel of land? Based on how much they know they can build, we have to be very open-minded and open publicly about the capacity of a piece of property for density. We have a bonus density program. They all understand that fully. We charge for more density. And all of this process works backward, and we eventually get to the point where the developer knows all of the fees involved if we've been open, all of the development cost charges involved if we've been open, and this clearly is a document that proposes to be very open about this, and the builder then decides his profit and what he can pay for this land. He bids for the land. This particular section on page 15 shows very clearly that developers know that they simply cannot raise their asking prices when faced with additional costs, that the selling price is set by the market. They also know that the costs of labor, materials, DCCs, return on investment are also fixed. Therefore, a developer faced with increased costs, such as CACs, will try to find, I'm going to correct their grammar, try to find savings in the cost of land offering less than they would have otherwise offered. And that's how the market works. Every economist will tell you that. Councillor O'Neill actually commented on that by suggesting that in some cases the vendor might not sell. He might wait for a higher price. There are ways around that, of course, and that is to have a gradually increasing CAC scale so that 2 years from now they're aware that their cost of development may well go up rather than down. But that's the argument about affordability. Almost every economist that I've ever heard talk about that says that's how it works. I've worked with clients on pro forma that show very clearly that that's how it works. Okay, so now let's go back to whether or not this is right So the province's document, this is the document published by the province that regulates local government, says not all, and this is on page 4, not all impacts of development are covered by these legislative provisions like DCCs, school site acquisition, 5% parkland, land for roadways, those kinds of extractions that have a legal basis. Not all impacts of development are covered by these legislative principles. Increasingly, local governments are taking the position that new developments should not be a burden on local taxpayers and are supplementing the above requirements with CACs. For example, local governments commonly impose DCCs to pay for allowable items like water and sewer mains, and then seek contributions toward facilities not covered by DCCs, such as a fire hall. And I read that one only because the people of Coquitlam, people in South Coquitlam, Millardville, Burquitlam, Central Coquitlam, paid for their fire halls. And now their taxes are going to paying for the new fire hall in Burkmount. Not the landowners that are benefiting from the new fire hall. Those landowners didn't have a fire hall for many years. We just built a new fire hall, but it's not eligible to be paid for by DCCs, and we didn't have a CAC. So therefore, taxes for everybody's taxes went up a little bit to pay for a fire hall for which they will get no benefit, and really a fire hall that is similar to the fire hall that they paid for themselves for their own neighborhood. So the principle behind CACs is to make it so that the development that benefits from the new fire hall pays for the fire hall. I agree that the province should expand DCC eligibility to include fire halls and include artificial turf fields and include rec centers, and those kinds of things should be eligible to be funded out of DCCs. They're not right now. The province produces this document to show us how CACs can be used in that way. So I think it's the most responsible thing for us to do to contemplate whether, in fact, we should do this. Okay, so at the bottom of page 7, it says, while committing to pass a bylaw prior to voting is problematic, and that's the challenge, is whether or not you would then hinge your decision on whether or not they paid DCCs. It says, CACs, an agreement that sets out how and when specified amenities would be transferred to local government afterwards, if a rezoning is passed, is allowed because it does not interfere with the Council Regional Board of discretion to pass the rezoning bylaw. The top of page 8, policy practices to avoid, including adopting a policy that could be seen as committing the Council or Regional Board to rejecting rezoning proposals unless the applicant paid CACs. So clearly that answers the question that was directed at Mr. McIntyre a couple of times. Can we say, no, you don't get your rezoning if you don't pay the CACs? Of course not. It's not intended to be like that, and it says that would be problematic. Similarly problematic would be guaranteeing an applicant developer, either verbally or in writing, that a zoning amendment will pass if they make contributions, and obviously that's problematic too. So the challenge before us now is how do we pay for those amenities using a program that's set out by the province and the province then describes how to set out the program. The next paragraph, in some cases the legislation gives certain development approval decisions to an unelected official. Examples include the building inspector or the subdivision approving officer. Obviously you cannot give those folks the discretion associated with CACs. And I go to the bottom of the next page, sorry to do this, but there were so many questions raised as to whether this is proper or right. And the province has set out a document that says how to make this work, how to do it properly. At the bottom of page 9, this planning ahead, so what you do is you set out detailed information on the capacity of infrastructure, such as roads, water systems, fire service, recreation, to accommodate additional development, the stuff that you need to allow development to take place. That enables a local government to assess the impact of future development. This planning ahead approach offers a good model for considering potential CACs. Planning ahead can help ensure that potential contributions are earmarked for the highest priorities, understanding future growth projections, working with the community and stakeholders to identify amenities, and estimating and allocating the costs required to pay for these amenities. Could also include establishing preferred target amounts for CACs, once again with the intent that the development is what funds the amenities that make it so that we can approve the development. We had, I have two other items to read, but we had Coquitlam come before us a number of years ago, the community of Coquitlam repeatedly saying, don't approve density around the SkyTrain station until we can get some amenities, because when I was growing up in Coquitlam, our amenity was our backyard, quarter acre. Our amenity was the farm across the street. We'd hop the fence and we'd taunt the bull, kind of silly to do, but we had lots of space. We had, because, you know, I guess Coquitlam at the time was probably 2 families to the acre. Now it's pushing much, much higher. It's 10 families to the acre in some neighborhoods. It's, in some developments, hundreds of families to the acre. That means that the density of our amenities needs to be higher. It can't be a farm, it can't be a fallowed field. It obviously needs to be a more intense amenity. That's one of the reasons we go with artificial turf fields, is because you can get more play on an artificial turf, like 10 times more play per week on an artificial turf field as you can on a grass field. A grass field gets tired and mucky very quickly if you intensify its use. And obviously, as land intensity increases, we need to intensify the use of the amenity space, and that requires us to find a way to fund the amenities. And so, last one here is on page 11. Local governments are encouraged to borrow the principles and practices that apply to DCCs and use them to develop tables of, schedules of, estimated CAC amounts. These well-established DCC practices will help citizens and applicants, developers, appreciate the rationale for CACs and see them as fair and the process transparent. I'll read the first couple of words first. Again, local governments are encouraged. This is in the provincial government document talking about how to implement a CAC bylaw in your community. Local governments are encouraged to borrow the principles from DCCs and apply them to CACs. So there's much more in this document, and there's another document here that talks about the density benefit associated with CAC investments. I actually believe passionately that we need to provide amenities for our residents in order to ensure that we can continue to increase the density of our neighborhoods to supply more housing to deal with housing affordability. And if we can't do that, then it will have enormous impacts on the unaffordability of this region. And if we are successful in improving the density of the amenities and therefore the ability to densify our neighborhoods, we can tackle affordability. It's exact opposite of some of the arguments against CACs. CACs will, used properly, improve our capacity to supply housing affordability in our neighborhoods and allow more families better quality of life without having to raise the taxes on all of our residents to fund these kinds of amenities. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. Okay, so after that very detailed discussion there, I just want to say that I've heard very loudly and clearly since being elected that our residents, that although they're satisfied with life here in Coquitlam, 96% of surveyed residents in the last Ipsos Reid City of Coquitlam Citizen Survey are satisfied, but they want more amenities and services. And it also goes without saying that these residents also want taxes kept to the bare minimum, which I'm very proud to say we're doing. So CACs are a vehicle that provide the city with revenue to contribute to public amenities and to accommodate the growth that we are experiencing in our city. There was extensive public consultation on this, and based on the feedback and the input we heard and the reports I read the same ones as Mayor Stewart, I support staff's recommendation to expand our CAC program citywide and to use the funds primarily to fund capital projects outlined in the PRC Master Plan, the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan. And as a side note, I hope everybody watching and listening tonight has gone online and completed the survey that we have right now regarding the implementation of this master plan. Please do so if you haven't done it already. I did have concerns about the timing of July 1st, but this is no longer relevant since I heard it's been changed to September 1st.
No, haven't.
Oh, it hasn't
been changed. There's been discussion of it. It's there's an available motion that hasn't been moved. Right now, the motion before us is July 1st and a year from July 1st.
Oh, okay. Well, I did have concerns about the timing, being only 3 business days away. And another thing I just want to say publicly is I recognize no system is perfect, but I don't want to do anything to hinder more housing choices developments like the one we approved tonight. So I think it's my understanding that if a lot like this one on Edgar, if a bigger house was built, no CACs would get paid, even if it looks like it's built to accommodate multiple families. But they subdivide and make 2 houses, they pay the CACs. And
No. Mr. McIntyre.
Yeah, so I could just, I'm glad that question or that point is being raised, because that's the difference between the existing program and what's proposed now. Under the existing CAC program from Coquitlam Low Heat, it applies to multifamily, duplexes and above. So to provide equity across the full range of housing, residential unit types, this new program would propose it to be captured for single-family subdivisions. So in the case of the application Council considered earlier this evening, they'd get, and as consistent with the city's DCC program, they get credit for the one existing lot. There would be one net charge for the new lot based on the fees that are being recommended, or the amounts that are being recommended. So that's the difference between what's being proposed now versus the existing Coquitlam Low Heat program.
that's an improvement. Okay. I guess I was thinking I wouldn't want a landowner to simply just build another big house to save some money on subdividing, because we want smaller lots, subdivisions for housing choices.
And precisely on that, yes, if you took that same lot and put a large single family, there'd be no charges. DCC, CACs, frontage, kind of a free ride.
Okay, thank you for that. Overall, I think the consultation was very thorough, very well done. The recommendations put forward are solid, provide a program that many respondents actually indicated they felt should have existed to begin with citywide. And it provides us with a well thought out solution to help address meeting needs for accommodating the growth in our rapidly expanding, economically vibrant, flourishing city. So I'm in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
Oh, my question was, have we ever, as a council, Coquitlam Council, asked the province to expand the use of DCCs to include amenities that are currently excluded, but of necessity to a modern and growing community? I'm asking that because I haven't been here since we've done that. So we did with parks.
We did with parks, and I think a couple of times we've actually spoken to ministers responsible for municipal affairs in the province at UBCM, asking the same thing. I know we've asked for artificial turf fields and for Mr. McIntyre. Yeah, the answer is yes, but I was trying to be more specific.
It was artificial turf fields. I think also sport field lighting came up as an issue before. Perhaps Raul may have better recollection of that, but it has come up as a question or as a discussion on occasion.
And certainly fire halls. I know I've raised that question with the minister responsible because of Coquitlam's need for a fire hall specifically to deal with a new development area. So,
what's the date today?
27.
We have until June 30th to submit to UBCM. Is this something that is already do we have any knowledge that this might already be going to UBCM this year as a recommendation? Because I think this is important stuff that we're modernizing, we're growing, and potentially we have a 3-day window to get something to UBCM. Is that something that could be facilitated or of any interest to council tonight?
My recollection is that at most UBCMs I've been to, there's a resolution that deals with expansion of the uses of DCCs. That's my recollection. I can't be specific on it. And the province certainly knows that we municipalities have called for that for a long time. The existing school site acquisition charges, which came out of the 90s, were an element of pressure by local governments and by school boards to try to figure out a way to, and partly out of Westwood Plateau, to figure out a way to fund the school site acquisition for new development areas. Similarly, the expansion of DCCs has been proposed for years. So we can always try again. I mean, I'm not certain that there isn't one already there when we get to UBCM this year in September.
I guess I'm asking because I'm listening to the debate tonight, and over we're saying we need a solution. We need a solution to our funding needs around Parks and Rec master plan. So I'm just, that seems to me that this is one of the solutions we already have is DCCs, but it's not covering what's kind of modern, like turf. And so I would like to put something forward, but I wouldn't know how to facilitate that through this.
Well, if you hold on a second, I'm going to do something unusual, and for only the purpose of providing some information on that question, Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you very much. I just quickly Googled UBCM resolutions, DCCs, and the series of hits came up, one of which was as far back as 2008, where Fraser Fort George Regional District was asking that petitioning the province to allow funds collected in lieu of parkland dedication to be used for capital improvements to parks and other community property. So they've been asking for just that one asked for flexibility, and I'm sure we're going to be able to find more if I had more than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess I'm trying to think of a solution. That's all. I don't want to. It's not that I want to think of a solution. It just becomes obvious through this report that we should probably be asking for more from our DCCs if it's not current or it's not meeting the current needs. So I guess I'm looking for some guidance on if there's a possibility to do that now as a motion, or
it would probably be awkward to. I mean, it's not. We don't normally. We wouldn't normally develop a resolution at a meeting. That's, of course, no one. I know you're not suggesting that because it would be awkward at best. I'm tempted to say, the document that's in the provincial document that's in the report actually speaks to the realities that the province seems to be putting forward CACs as a means that local governments can use to expand what DCCs don't pay for. So we could go back to the province and say, well, then let's formalize that. The province UBCM process to get the province to make a change is a couple of years long, assuming that they haven't been convinced yet by all of the other resolutions related to expanding DCCs. There's a possibility of a government change. I don't know what the other party is proposing related to that, but that's another avenue.
I appreciate that information, so I'll put that in the back of my mind for future discussion. Okay, so I just had one question, and it is on bullet number 4. Direct the CAC revenue collected to be used primarily to help fund the capital cost. That's always a little bit worrisome. What does primarily mean, and is it possible for us to say exclusively unless otherwise approved by council? I would like to understand how restricted we are with that language primarily.
Yeah. Mr. Stedman.
If I could answer that, I would note that every project that will be funded from CACs will be specifically approved by council, so you do not need to add any kind of language around unless approved by council, because every project will be approved by council. As Mr. McIntyre has explained and Mr. Alueva has explained in part of the Parks Master Plan implementation, there is a significant need in the Parks implementation area for additional funds, and the thought is that exactly what we're saying here is that most of the funds would go towards the PAX program because that is something that is a community amenity and et cetera. There are occasional projects, and they're not going to be every year at all, but there are occasional projects that may have some benefit in terms of being funded from such a revenue stream. And the mayor earlier highlighted fire halls. We don't have any fire halls in need of funding in the next few years because we just built one. But things like works yards, will be expensive. It serves all the service areas, and it may be considered for that. We haven't finalized that, and all of this will be specific to long-range planning and and budgeting, and everything will be approved by council in a variety of forums.
Thank you. Well, I'll just make one comment then in closing that I am a little bit uncomfortable with the word primarily. I think I've said it before in council that I don't like to leave things to chance. I'd rather that we were more prescriptive, but I accept what Mr. Stevlin had to say today, and I thank you for that.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
I wasn't going to say anything because so much has been said, but a couple of things. The market dictates what a house is going to sell for, or an apartment's going to sell for. And to me, in this whole thing, it's the province that has dropped the ball. The province has asked the regions to get ready for density. And as Mayor Stewart knows and Councillor Asmussen, we went back 10 years ago. They said you're going to get another 500,000, you're going to get another million, you're going to get another 3 million people. And I think it's probably gone beyond their expectations. What we need is new provincial changes and some new federal changes. We have a housing situation in British Columbia that's just unprecedented. I won't go into all the foreign investment and all that, but the province needs to take a look at that and talk to the feds about it. But more importantly, when the government is encouraging the use of CACs and suggesting in ways of bringing it in, why haven't they legislated it? Why haven't they changed the legislation to even allow DCCs and then allow DCCs to be used for everything else? Where our problem is going to come is that the new development is understandable, but when we get into the older areas, and now like the one here tonight, we put down one house and we build 2 houses. So now perhaps instead of a family of 5, we're going to have 2 families of 5. And the little park down the street, there's just not going to be enough swings. I won't say teeter-totters again because I understand we don't have them anymore. But there's not going to be enough swings. So who pays for them? The going taxpayers today, or do we have CACs that we can actually go in and refurbish the park? Because that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to do that all over the place. There needs to be... Are you having fun with my teeter-totters? No. There needs to be more flexibility. And the only way we're going to get flexibility, I mean, CACs is great. And I have to say, most of the developers that we deal with here understand the problem. In a new area, it's great that we have DCCs to get all the new cash in. But when we don't have any cash to put all the stuff that we need in the park and on the park, that's a problem for us. And the taxpayers now, a question we often get is, it's great that we're getting all this new development, but are we paying for it? Or does new development pay for itself? And that's a really, really hard question to answer. So I'm going to support this because I believe that new development needs to pay for new services. I would like to encourage somehow, although I think it will come up from somebody this year again, that the province get in and make some new legislation that has to go along with all this new development. I have a problem with the date. I think it should probably be the end of September or October 1st, because I don't like doing anything that sort of spawns itself during the summer season, and I think then we'll need a full month to get things going. So I would propose an October 1st date for this. And I have a couple of questions. On the $3, I think you took that down. Can you put that back up, Mr. Gilbert, please? The $3 for the gross floor area of multifamily floor space. So to go along with my theme that I need to have these things for my citizens to use, do you give any break at all for any developments that have their own pool and rec centers and all that in it? You don't give a reduction, and was that ever considered when you were talking about it? If I have a 10-story building and everyone's going to swim in their own pool and they're not needing mine, is there any reduction for that building?
Yeah. Mr. McIntyre.
Yeah, I believe that was discussed in part, but also it was recognized that those amenity areas, those are our existing zoning bylaw requirements separate, totally separate from a CAC program. Also, it tends to be something that many of the developers like to include as part of the overall project offering.
Absolutely,
for marketing.
The reason I'm asking, I'm just trying to look at the fairness of this. Yeah. So in the multifamily, so I could build an apartment block here, and Benita could build one here, and if mine has a pool and hers doesn't, we get charged the same $3 a square foot, and yet I'm providing an amenity for my citizens, and she's not.
That's true. That project has greater amenities, but they're private. They're for the residents, and then they're also
89 units that won't be swimming in this pool at the park. Yeah.
And they'll be carrying those costs thereafter as well in terms of maintenance.
That's right. So I really would like to think that one out a bit. And also now we're going on to the parcels, and you're going by lot size, not by buildable gross floor area.
Yeah, this one was, we looked at this and looked at it from various angles and different approaches. Again, kind of following along with the existing city's DCC bylaw, which charges on a lot, for single-family lots on a lot size basis. We felt that would be the more appropriate, consistent approach. And I believe also, and Andrew can help me with this, it relates to the buildable area on a single-family lot to sort of set these ratios. Perhaps I can ask just Andrew to go through that point of detail, because there is a logic behind the numbers for the single-family aside from just the lot size.
Sure, thank you, Jim. So the, as Jim said, the 375 square meters is the exact same break between large and small lots as in the existing DCC bylaw program, and that's again set to the size of house. Certainly those smaller lots, given the setbacks and other limitations, you get a smaller house and therefore theoretically fewer people.
What's the biggest house you can get on a smaller lot? I want to build a house on C, how big is it? And if I want to build a house on B, how big is it? What's the max?
There's not a maximum floor area size in our single-family zones. It's a combination of factors. It's the site coverage, the building height, the setbacks, and through that analysis, we arrived at those recommended dollar amounts.
I just don't want to see sort of a monster house paying the $5,500 when a modest 2,500 square foot home would. I think if you're going to pay over a certain amount, if you're going to build over a certain amount on a lot, then you pay more, because I think that we have to stop at the modest house, at the moderate, some line we have to draw so that when monster houses come in, we can just rack it up. So I don't know how you came to these numbers, but I think it would probably take us an afternoon to go through them all and figure it out, because I understand there's really not a formula. It's just guessing which would be best.
On that, Your Worship, if I can offer, and I think as we did with the initial CAC program, there was a commitment to monitor it and report back. And I think it's out of one of those reports that we got to the thought of expanding the program. We can, if council supports moving forward with this, we will monitor it and we will provide an update report and let you know how the numbers are working out. And if there's some need to tweak that or make some modifications, we can certainly identify that.
So my concerns then are the developers that are providing amenities and the people that are going to be on these larger lots that are going to be building monster houses. Those are my two main concerns. I'll support it, but I would like to set the date to October 1st. I'd make that as an amendment.
Motion is to amend the two dates. It comes into effect October 1st, and that the grace period then extends a year hence. That's your amendment?
I can't read. Oh, here.
So scroll up to the date.
Can I speak before that?
Yep, we'll do that just a second. So right there in front of you?
Yep, October 1st.
Okay, so that will, motion will be considered, the motion to amend will be considered in a moment. We would need another round, a motion for, oops, Councillor Wilson. Did you speak yet? You haven't. Yeah, go ahead.
But it wasn't really, Councillor Reid put it very well, development needs to pay for itself, and right now, under our current system, development does not pay for itself. And that's why I believe the CAC program is essential, so that we can finally have development pay for all the necessities in that community. There was a comment made that we're penalizing single-family homes because it's over 3 times the cost of the CACs for multifamily. Well, when you look at it per square foot, it's pretty much the same. On a $5,500 on the larger lot size, you're going to have at least an 1,800 square foot house on there, and that's $3 a square foot.
1,000 square foot would be modest.
I haven't seen an 1,800 square foot.
Well, that's so when you're looking at $3 a square foot for multifamily and a flat rate for single family, I think the single family ones are actually getting a deal when you base it on square footage. We have the province pushing as hard as they can to force municipalities to pay for transit out of property tax. Property tax is one of the most regressive taxes out there, and if the cities are going to be forced to pay for transit out of property tax, how are we ever going to provide the amenities in our community without increasing property tax dramatically? So again, I think the CACs are essential to compensate for that. And I guess finally, all of council approved unanimously the Parks, Rec, and Culture Master Plan. And in that plan, we have over $400 million of work that needs to be funded. And a lot of that work can be funded by this $103 million that's proposed in the CAC program. So I don't know where we would find that $103 million to pay for all this work that we have generally already approved. So nobody likes to add fees to costs. This is a very, very modest fee. It's not going to affect dramatically at all the purchase price of a home in Coquitlam. It's going to lead to lower property taxes for everybody. It's going to provide the amenities that we all want, that people are demanding. And at the same time, it may actually allow us to be able to fund transit. So I am fully in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. There's on a motion prepared to go onto the floor. There's been a request for a second round of debate on the unamended motion. I'll need a motion for that second round if someone wants to move that. Otherwise, Councillor Asmussen moves a second round of debate.
I just asked clarification.
Is there a seconder? If it's just a clarification, if you can phrase it only in questions, then we're good.
It's about your comments, Mayor Stewart. From my impression of what your comments were, I want to make sure.
Okay, and what's your question?
You talked about fire halls, and you talked about the people in existing areas have paid for their fire halls, and that they're now going to have to pay for the fire halls in the new areas. But the people in all of Coquitlam pay taxes for the fire hall in any area of the city. And an area where I came from in Burke Mountain did not have a paid fire hall and paid taxes into the city for many years without any services to those fire halls. So I think I'll give you the opportunity to correct yourself that taxes are paid for services from the whole of the city, not for people in one area towards that service, that fire hall, that rink, or whatever. It's paid for the citizens throughout the area. And the impression you gave is that those people in those areas paid for that by themselves in that area, when it was all the people, regardless of where they had the use of that fire hall or that service, or not paid for that service.
Absolutely. All of Coquitlam had a fire department, and all of Coquitlam paid toward those fire halls.
Even areas that didn't have it
even areas that were sparsely populated and paid almost no taxes as far as a percentage of the perhaps 2% of the tax base of Coquitlam was in the Burke Mountain area when I was growing up. It still had access to the fire hall and had its own fire hall, actually. It wasn't a paid fire hall, but it had certainly costs associated with it. I get your point, though. The reality is now we need a brand new fire hall in a brand new development area that we didn't need before, and the reason we need it is because we're developing it. Should that development pay for the fire hall, or should those people who had nothing to do with the new homes up in Burke Mountain, should they also pay for the new fire hall in Burke Mountain? And that was my point. My position is they shouldn't.
But that's no different than the fire hall at...
Yep.
Yeah. And my question is, that's no different than
that's a
all
question.
at Mariner and anywhere else. And so, I mean, it's about taxes are paid equitably for all services by all residents in the city.
And that's your question. Okay. Does anyone have an answer for that question? Okay. Councillor O'Neill was on the list, but he didn't have a... No, you're not. Good. That got cleared up?
He was just advanced, so he stays on the list until I get him off the list.
Good point. Okay. So now, Councillor Reid moved an amendment to change July 1 to October 1, and it's been seconded by Councillor Marsden. Any discussion of that? Seeing none, the motion is an amendment. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Asmundson is opposed to the amendment. Okay. Councillor O'Neill is opposed to the amendment. Okay. The amendment passes. The motion as amended. Any further discussion? Anyone left that can discuss it? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion as amended. All opposed. Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Zerillo, and Councillor Asmundson are opposed. The motion carries. Motion is to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Oops.
I believe before we proceed on a voted item, we should invite Councillor Hodge back in if he isn't.
What are the chances he's still here?
I don't know, but it seems like a matter of etiquette.
Very well. Why don't we pause for a moment while we...
He's not here.
Yep,
He's on a ferry.
It would appear that Councillor Hodge is no longer present and thus has no interest in the vote on adjourn.
Well, I'm shocked. Today, of course, is Newfoundland and Labrador's Discovery Day. John Cabot discovered Newfoundland and Labrador on this day in 1497, which probably came as a shock to the hundreds of thousands of people who lived there at the time. The motion is to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.